We go back to 2013, and in April, May 2013, my organization, PRG, produced a citizen hearing on disclosure in Washington, D.C. at the Press Club, in the main ballroom, in the National Press Building, 2 blocks from the Capitol. And it was done to try to show what hearings on the UAPET issue would look like if they were really held. Because there hadn't been one since 1968, and it was one day. It was no big deal. Every effort to get hearings since 1968 had failed. So, we dressed up the ballroom like a hearing room. We brought in 42 witnesses, 6 former members of Congress who asked fantastic questions over 5 days and 30 hours. It was all filmed, and it was put out online. It was streamed, so that anyone on Capitol Hill or a journalist or anyone else who was a bit too timid to come down there and be seen in person, they could watch it from the safety of their office or their home. So that took place. It got some press coverage. Not a huge amount, but it got some. The question is, did it have any impact on people in Washington, D.C., particularly, as well as journalists? I don't know. We'll see. We would find out later. What happened next was, in very late 2014, 15 months later, PRG launched a political initiative regarding a leading candidate to be president, a woman by the name of Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who was way ahead in the polls. And because she and her husband and her campaign chairman, John Podesta, had a very long-standing connection to the ET issue, which I consider to be significant news if you're running for president, I was able, along with my publicist, to actually get that story going in Washington. It's like you start a fire, and if the press thinks it's a story, the fire grows. And it worked. The campaign went on all through 2015 and 2016, and during those 17, 18 months, 400 stories were written in major papers, New York Times, Washington Post, everywhere, about the connection between the leading candidate and president and the ET issue, which had never happened before. There was enough press that it forced her to go public on a number of programs and talk about it, including her husband and John Podesta and even President Obama. That had never happened before. And so that was successful. Good. The idea was to get that story going, get the press involved, and see how that affected Washington, D.C. And then something happened which wasn't expected. She lost. And we entered a new administration. So, while I was doing all of that, and the people supporting me were doing that, there was a lot of volunteers involved, believe me, something else was going on that I didn't know about. And it's possible that the citizen hearing on disclosure and the political initiative during the Clinton campaign may have played a part in this something else, but I don't know for sure. I mentioned the possibility. Maybe down the line we'll find out. So it may have had a role, it may have been influential, or it may not have been. But there's the connection is potentially there, and the timing is right. So I bring up PRG's activities. But this other thing was big, and I knew nothing about it. The first clue that something else was going on was in March of 2016, when Tom DeLonge turned up on Coast to Coast AM being interviewed by George Knapp for 4 hours. You can find this interview if you go to the archives of Coast to Coast AM, and you've got the password and so forth. But it's up there. You can listen to the whole 4 hours. And there's several things that I took away from that interview. One, that something was going down of substance. There were references to high-level people inside the Pentagon and NASA and so forth without getting into specifics. Secondly, that George Knapp was not simply bringing him on to talk about it and had just learned about it. It was clear that George Knapp was involved in this, that he had known about it for some time, that he was directly involved. And that's fine, because George is a brilliant guy and connected to a lot of people. So I took that away. But the actual specific, what was it going to be, wasn't there. there was a mention that there's some books would be published under the rubric of secret machines. And that was it. And I'm going, well, that's fascinating. And then I kind of put it aside. And then the next month, a book was published called Secret Machines. And I'm going, okay, whatever was going on. And by the way, the fact that Tom DeLonge was a 40-year-old rock star who was supposedly talking to top people in CIA and the DOD and NASA and so forth was a little hard to get my brain around, but not out of the question. So I put it aside. The next hint that something was going on big occurred, again, these were interesting times, folks, when I believe some Russians, I believe it's Russians, hacked John Podesta's computer and may have hacked the computer for the Democratic National Committee, which was hacked initially, and those were dumped out. 50,000 records were hacked and delivered to WikiLeaks, and then WikiLeaks put them out in October, leading into the election. 50,000, 5,000 a day over a period of about 12 days for maximum impact. And in those emails, we learned that there was about 100 of them dealing with UAPs. And almost all of that involved interaction between Tom DeLonge and John Podesta, which you put the two together and you're going, wait a minute, what's going on here? There was photos. John Podesta was interviewed by him. He was introduced to some people that he'd been talking to. There was no indication that Tom DeLonge had talked with anybody in the Republican side. And so that was kind of outed. I don't think it really impacted the campaign. Other emails impacted the campaign. And emails that were leaked earlier from the Democratic National Committee impacted the campaign and contributed to the outcome of the election. So that was interesting. But then the election took place, and I didn't know what to do. I mean, basically, I didn't see a way forward at that point. So I stepped back. I think most people did. I went to the UK, actually. Had a place to stay. Love London, and I stayed there, watching things from afar. And then in October of 2017, while I was out of the country, the To the Stars Academy was launched, and the website was put up. And all of my colleagues started getting calls from the media and started appearing on news shows all the way. And I was nowhere to be seen because I was in London. I was out of the country. Bad idea. Kind of regret that. It's okay. So, what did I see? What did you see as of October, early October 2017? You saw a website with a bunch of people's name as part of the team and a mission statement for the To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences. I went down the list of those people, I read their resumes, and I instantly knew what had happened. What can I say? It's my job to kind of know those things. In that moment, as I read those resumes, I realized that at that moment, the disclosure movement, right, capital D disclosure movement, the effort to get the government to finally confirm the ET presence, was now being led by the military intelligence complex, which is something I never thought I would see happen.
Yes, me too.
Ever. And by that, I don't mean that the SecDef and the CIA director and so forth had put together a plan for the military intelligence complex to advance this issue. No, not at all. That something had been put together by individuals within these entities who personally had decided that it was time to move forward. The fact is, and I don't think this will shock you, that there have been people inside our government, our military, intelligence services, going all the way back to the 1940s, 50s, who personally felt that we should know the truth about this. In fact, the Army Air Force Base at Roswell thought that would be cool for us to know the truth about this, which is why they put a press release out saying they had a saucer, which turned out was probably a bad move on their part. But the fact is that's always been the case. But not enough felt that way that they would try to force the action if they could, and they couldn't. So they did their jobs. They protected us, they pursued national security interests and what have you, while they kept their personal views about the truth and our need to know, our right to know, and whether we can handle the truth to themselves. However, over time, thanks to the work of a lot of people in this room and people in the next room and so many other colleagues, thousands and thousands of people for decades, the number of people inside the military intelligence complex who felt that way grew and grew. And they were involved in various ways. And we know that occasional leaks would come out. Some documents would suddenly turn up out of nowhere on microfiche. So there was kind of some effort to kind of poke at it, but nothing that could change the paradigm. And then the To the Stars Academy was launched. And what I saw was that over a period of time, and I believe the formation of this group started coming together in 2015. Exactly when in 2015, I don't know. The people that ended up in the group, and there's a lot more that are involved that are still working in the military intelligence complex, names unknown. Some of them had been working on this issue for years, but in terms of putting together this project, I think that was in 2015, which is why there's a possibility that they were influenced by the citizen hearing on disclosure and the campaign of Secretary Clinton. Again, we don't know because the origin story has not been divulged and probably won't be for a while.
And the militia.
So
take over because they thought that they was
what
going to be.
What was I saying? I was seeing a group of individuals that no longer worked for the government.
So they were doing
forming an organization that was not a government organization. It was going to had a mission statement to pursue all aspects of this issue, also raise money because you can't do these things without money. Set up a public benefit corporation offering $5 a share. I think they probably planned on raising $25, $35, $40 million, and they very well could if things had gone a little differently. And the way I interpreted it was this, that as that moment, the disclosure movement was being led by the military intelligence complex via proxy. They were essentially a proxy for the military intelligence complex. However, the military intelligence complex didn't know that. And when they announced, it caught virtually the entire complex by surprise. The Pentagon, the CIA, they kept it tight. They needed to, because you can be assured that there were plenty of people in our national security community that had no desire for that group to ever exist and emerge. Right. And if they could have stopped it, they would have, but they didn't know. And they were out the door. Okay, fine. By proxy. Why does that matter? Because there was a lot of things that those people in the TTSA could do that they could not possibly do while working for the government by being in the CIA or working at the DOD. But once they were out from under government payroll and a private citizen, they could do things. And one of the things they did was to go to the New York Times with extraordinary information about developments within the DOD and, most importantly, 3 pieces of gun camera footage from UAP intercepts by Navy planes,
I was watching like a hawk.
Which had never happened before in the history of the issue, except for a small leak way back that went to some French documentary team. It was the Nimitz case and disappeared into history. But in terms of formal release, no government had ever done it. Why? Because there are thousands and thousands of clips of intercepts of UAPs by military defense planes. And they are taken and they are brought back and they are put in a vault. They're not out because obviously if they were coming out all the time, the truth embargo would collapse. The Nimitz video, for instance, it's just a tiny clip of a much larger clip, probably in better resolution. They got tons of it. Imagine if hundreds of those came out. You think the truth embargo could stand? No, it collapsed. So just 3 turning up, big deal. New York Times vetted all this, put the stories out. December 16th, 2017. Front page, below the fold. Nothing like that had ever happened before either. And this wasn't 1969, the age of print, when you put a story with a photo and then you gave it to the public and they read it and they threw it in the trash. And it was gone. Unless you wanted to go to the archives of the New York Times, go through the microfiche or whatever, you could find that article. No. That was the past. This is the present. And so, sure, the articles were in the printed copy of the New York Times, but they were also up on the internet. And as you know, the internet includes video. And so the clips went up on the internet as part of the story. And those clips, those 3 UAP intercept clips, have now been seen by an untold number of hundreds of millions of people around the
This
world.
is what they were afraid of.
This isn't 1969.
Right.
Right.
They were
The
afraid of
pilots
this.
that were involved and then testified, and interviews of them have been seen by people all over the world, et cetera, et cetera.
I was so
That was the
fast
Rubicon
on it
that we
they were like,
crossed.
wow.
At that point, the disclosure movement was inside the city. We were never going to come back. There was never going to be a 1969. There was never going to be some ridiculous
Yeah, we were
report
finally
cooked up by a
moving forward.
university, George Washington U or something, saying there's nothing to
But we
this.
still had,
And then they were going to close down any investigations and then destroy MUFON. That was 1969. This is 2020, 2021. We're not going back. We're never going back. We're heading straight to disclosure. And the only thing that is determining when it finally happens is certain circumstances in the current world. And there are some substantial ones. I've made some predictions, going all the way back to early 2020, and I was wrong because of certain political developments as well as certain viral developments. So essentially, what
I've been
is
wrong,
determining the pace of
Because
this
we
process
were pushing
leading to
it.
disclosure? There's 2 or 3 variables. One is vaccination schedule. How quickly X number of people get vaccinated or get the disease so that they're immune so that we can operate in a more normal fashion. The other is major political developments, because it turns out that there are 2, 3 huge bills that are in fact on the table under the new administration. These are not trivial, these are massive, and the circumstances in the Congress are rather extraordinary. And so let me tell you, they are major, and they're taking up a huge amount of the press attention. So those 2 things alone have slowed down the process here. But
Yep.
it's not going away. It's simply
I
on
wonder if this
hold
is
for a
why,
while. And plenty has happened,
Mansion.
as you know. All right, so just to back up a little bit as we just sort of get a recap of what took place, is the New York Times articles came out, and then is when I became convinced this is it. What's going to happen next? Next was a show on History Channel. The TTSA's next major move was to put together a show for History Channel called Unidentified Inside America's Secret UFO Investigation. It ran for 2, quote, seasons, kind of back to back, 14 episodes. And that was very revealing. A lot of things happened there. A lot of things were re-emphasized. Witnesses were brought forward. New witnesses turned up. Some were in silhouette and so forth. And I noted that with great interest. And so that took place. Meanwhile, the third variable that was kind of slowing things down earlier on, because the 2 I just mentioned are somewhat recent, the pandemic as well as the major bills of a new administration, was the political chaos of the time. The political chaos in the United States from 2017 on is something I've never seen in my lifetime. And my knowledge of history is such that while things did get a little weird in the 1800s, particularly the earlier 1800s, that was then. This is a
That's why
global
Statue of Liberty
world
was brought
now with 7
in
billion people.
1888.
The political chaos in the
Because
United States was
Europe
absolutely
saw
unprecedented.
the problems
And
that
it
were
had
going on
everybody
here. And they go, no, no, no.
confused,
You
up
got
against
this
the
to
wall,
yet to go
not
through.
knowing what to do, being shocked every day. It was wild and crazy. Okay, so not exactly, I kind of liken it to like a force 4 hurricane. They turn up in Louisiana, as you know, every couple of months. In fact, if you ask somebody in Louisiana, what's it like to be in a force 4 hurricane? It's Wednesday. So it's not a good time to hold a block party, Let's set some tables up outside, get a barbecue going, invite the neighbors over.
Don't make me laugh.
No. There's a
Don't
force
make me
4 hurricane
laugh.
going on. You need to wait for that to pass. And that's the situation. And so that was delaying things. So what took place, again, this is my assessment, is that, okay, you stay indoors and you do what you can while the hurricane rages above.
You cook.
And what
You
was
clean.
happening behind the scenes? Essentially this. The 2 key players in this the people that were from the beginning, the ones that were going to drive the agenda, and the agenda wasn't the mission statement that was on a website back in 2017. It's a fine mission statement, and with a lot of money, they could do some of those things, but that wasn't the agenda. They didn't set up this organization to pursue that particular mission statement. This organization was set up with a key agenda, and that agenda was to get congressional hearings. And the reason you have to get congressional hearings is that's the door to getting disclosure. First the hearings, then disclosure. We've always known that, which is why we've tried to get hearings repeatedly for years and years, and every attempt has been blocked. Because those who manage the truth embargo know you have the hearings, the real hearings, it's over. And if they don't want it to be over, they must block the hearings. But what was happening with the TTSA was of a magnitude, and of course with the New York Times getting involved, that now hearings were getting very possible, and so they continued to pursue it. And here's how they did it. Christopher Mellon, financially secure, powerful political background, not only over on the Capitol Hill side, but over on the DOD side. Worked with the DIA, worked with key committees, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. He is the political guy, and it was he that was going up on the Hill and briefing members of Congress privately for months and months. How many briefings? We don't know. Could be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Almost certainly he was focusing on the key committees, Intel, Armed Services, because these are the committees that would likely hold these hearings. Not likely, would certainly hold these hearings. He took witnesses along with him, pilots, Fravor, others. How many witnesses, we don't know. We also know that he briefed the president in a similar fashion, right? Okay? When I found that out is when I picked up stakes in Los Angeles and moved back to Washington, because at that point I realized, well, it's really happening, and I need to get set up in DC for the big show, right? Which I thought could happen soon. So anyway, he's doing that. He's briefing members of Congress privately, off the record, no press release. Why do you do that? Why do you brief members of Congress and committee chairs, but you don't put out a press release, you don't talk to the press about what neither you nor the member of Congress talks about it? You only do that for one reason, in preparation for hearings. That's why you do that. Okay, fine. So at the same time that he's doing that, Lou Elizondo is doing something else. He is the spokesperson for this. I think that was the plan all along, but if it wasn't, it was inevitable that he would be. He is the person to be the spokesperson. He is an unusual man in many ways, but I think you've seen enough of him to know that he is every man. He's an intellectual, a college guy. He also looks like a biker.
Yes.
Right? He's done Intel, but he's got a family and kids. I mean, he's somebody that can relate to just about anyone.
He has family.
And he's not to be taken lightly.
Into this just
and he's not afraid of anything. 20 years in the Army as an Intel operative in some of the most dangerous places in the world is going to be something that a man who is not afraid of much is going to do. So Lou is unusual, and he is the spokesperson. But he's something else. Primarily, well, not primarily, but as part, as you see, as the Unidentified series comes out on History Channel, you see Lou going to the houses of witnesses and sitting there at their dining room table talking to them. And then they're showing up on the show later on. He was interviewing witnesses. He was vetting witnesses. And we've learned that because of that show, because of everything that was happening, including the New York Times articles and other things, and the press coverage, which has been exceptional, the bar was dropping very quickly for any witness, any former member of the military, and even maybe some active members, to think about coming forward. It just looked like it was okay, safe, nothing happening to Fravor. And if the bar gets lowered, people start coming forward. And so if you're a former member of the military, and you had an incident like Fravor or Kevin Day or Voorhees or any of those, and you thought, gee, I've got a story, who do I call? You call Lou, don't you? How many contacts he got, we don't know, but I've heard it's substantial. So essentially, Lou is in a position to create a list of witnesses more than enough to serve as many hearings on Capitol Hill, and I think that was his key role there, in addition to being a public spokesperson. So you've got You're developing a list of military witnesses. You're preparing the Congress for hearings. What do you think is going to happen? You're going to have hearings, and the military witnesses are going to testify. That seemed to be unfolding perfectly well, except, again, things were slowed down by certain circumstances. But all of that could be done behind the scenes. You can vet witnesses indoors. You don't have to be out in a hurricane. You can be talking to members of Congress indoors. Let the hurricane rage above and wait for it to pass. And it did, but not completely. Pandemic came in, and there you are. So we're kind of in a holding pattern, waiting for things to clear so that the hearings can take place. And I think the soonest that can happen is the end of this year. Now, as another indication of why
What do you mean, January 30th?
the progress is substantial, is this. In the last 7 years, going back to 2014, the Washington Post has published 59 articles on the UAP-ET issue. UAP stands for Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. Used to be UFO, but UFO got completely corrupted by the government and became a source of ridicule and is useless to us. UAP is new and doesn't carry that baggage, but it means exactly the same thing.
That's what I thought.
Right? In other words, use your language. Use the language of the activist movement. Don't use the government's language. The government does this all the time. They create language that supports their policy. You use their language, you support their policy. I don't do that. But almost done, dear. You have a chance. So, 59 articles. In the previous 7 years before that, the Washington Post published 25 articles. And more importantly, of the 59 articles published by the Washington Post on this issue in the last 7 years, 25 of them, 40%, have been published this year. New York Times published 25 articles in the last 7 years. They published, I think, 15 or 16 in the 7 years prior to that, and 30% of the articles published in the last 7 years for the New York Times were published this year. I assure you, that is not trivial. I assure you that what that means is that the paper of record of the United States, the New York Times, and the political paper of record of the United States, the Washington Post, is in. They know what's going on. They know how big the story is. They're going to keep publishing. And then the only question remains is, will they get some of their top investigative reporters, hand them a bunch of money, and say, go dig through the Pentagon's trash cans? They may not have to, because I think this man is going to unfold without that. But these papers are never going to back away from this issue. They're never going to say, well, you know, nothing happened.
The astrology
We did a lot of stories. We kind of know it's real, but let's move on to other news. No, they're not going to relent. And when things get going again, I assure you, they're going to be back in force. And to emphasize that point, the New York Times did something very cool. When the two articles were originally published in December 16, 2017, they essentially came through Leslie Kean.
I saw that.
Who is well known and has written articles about this and known to some of the people in TTSA. I think she was approached quite away. Then when the New York Times decides to vet and move forward, they brought in their top national security person, Helene Cooper, absolute brilliant woman, and she was obviously put on writing that article. But they didn't stop there. They added a third person to those two articles, Ralph Blumenthal. Why did they do that? One, Ralph Blumenthal was writing a book on John Mack, and they knew it. He'd been working on it for 3 years. He was in. Ralph Blumenthal was a legend at the New York Times. He worked there for 30 years. He had a Pulitzer Prize and was nominated for a second Pulitzer Prize, and they put him on those articles. That was their way of saying to the rest of the journalistic world, we're serious about this. We finally get it, all right? This is the biggest news story in history.
Yeah.
What's coming will be the most profound event in human history, and we're going to cover it. We've been a little slow to the starting blocks, but the fact is that we feel we've covered it appropriately, and now things are in a place where we can go deep.
They were waiting for this.
And so you have that. All right.
The Times.
So I'll finish up with this. I know that there's a lot of theories out there about who did what and why
Right.
and what the agenda is.
Right. Forget
And a
about
lot
it.
of
We're going to
granular
go
work
forward.
that's being done. I have no problem with that. But look, sometimes things are just what they are. And my job, I feel, is to give the public a fundamental sense of what's happening, not try to cover, explain, or deal with every theory out there and every controversy over some small aspect of it. I think it's important to know the basics of what are happening. The basics of what are happening is profound enough. And if I learn more about that, I'll let you know.
Okay.
So that's it. That's my recap. And I don't know if we have time for a question. If we don't, that's up to Serena.
All right.
30 minutes, okay?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Yeah, I hope you all have questions. We're going to all answer questions together after the next presentation. So do write them on the pieces of paper, little cards that are at the back or that you may have
Can I
received.
write it online?
If not, there's some cards at the back. Just ask at that desk there, and we'll get into all your questions then. So this is a bit high. So our next speaker is Daniel Sheehan, and he is, I'll tell you, it's impossible to tell you everything he's done in his life. It's just incredible. So if you were here last night for his interview, you will have learned a lot about what he's done. But I want to give you a quick overview. He is a graduate of Harvard Law School, a professor of world politics at the University of California. He is the general counsel and co-founder for the Institute of Cooperation in Space. He was legal counsel for Pentagon Papers, Iran-Contra, 3 Mile Island, and Karen Silkwood cases. And through the Lakota People's Law Project, he has won cases and secured rights for the Native Americans and to protect the lands and the sacred lands and waters and from the pipelines and other threats. And for many years has been on the forefront of UFO disclosure and its related fields as well. He's been the counsel for the Disclosure Project Citizens Hearing on Disclosure, and currently in the legal counsel is the legal counsel for Luis Elizondo. And by the way, Luis Elizondo was invited, but he's actually traveling at this time, or he would be here. So we're hoping he'll be here in February. He was interested in coming. And Luis Elizondo, of course, is in a case against the Defense Department. So during Daniel's talk, he will be introducing you to Mark Sims. I'll just give you a quick overview. Mark is a successful business entrepreneur. He is the executive film producer and a contact team.
February, which is
and
about
Mark and Daniel recently produced
32.
the Making Contact Convergence and launched the Making Contact Campus. And they'll be telling you about that later. So first, Daniel will be speaking. Let's give a warm welcome to Daniel Sheehan.
So I'm here just briefly to do kind of a little opening statement for each of us. And then we're going to be sitting and chatting with each other and with Serena. But I just wanted that I've got kind of a handful of different phases of my life that are pertinent to the discussion we're going to have this morning. One of them is, the first one is that I was general counsel for the United States Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C., and the co-director of their National Social Ministry Office, which is the public policy formation for the largest single order in the Catholic Church, which is the largest single religious denomination in Western civilization. And the Jesuit order plays an extraordinarily important role in that particular community, formulating policies and being their diplomatic corps people, their sort of intelligence operation, as well as running most of their colleges and universities for educational purposes. So that's that first incarnation that is pertinent to us here is because I was there at the Jesuit headquarters helping to run that office on public policy when I was contacted by the Congressional Research Service back in 1977 shortly after President Carter was elected. And President Carter, because as you probably all know, had seen a UFO when he was the governor of Georgia. Not just like a light in the sky, or
No, it was right
but
above
a
him.
full UFO.
They took a picture
and
of
that
it.
he was certain that they existed, they were real. And so that when he arrived as the president-elect in November of 1976, he went immediately and called in the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, who at that time was George H.W. Bush. Prior to his becoming vice president under Reagan, prior to his becoming president, this is when he was the director of the Central Intelligence Agency
Wow.
under President Ford. And so President-elect Carter confronted him and demanded to have access to the information about UFOs and whether they were of extraterrestrial origin and what the CIA knew about them. And it turns out that George Bush Sr. refused to give him the information, saying that he didn't have a need to know, and that this was information that was extremely closely held, and that if he wanted to get the information, he would have to go through another process. The CIA wasn't going to give it to him. And so President Carter ended up going to the House of Representatives, to the Congressional Committee on Science and Technology, and getting them to go to the Congressional Research Service, their Science and Technology Division, to undertake a classified investigation and research on this subject. And I was contacted in my capacity as general counsel over at the Jesuit headquarters in their social ministry office by Marcia Smith, who was the director of the Science and Technology Division of the Congressional Research Service, and asked if I would be able to get access to the information in the Vatican archives in Rome to see what it is that the Catholic Church knew about this phenomenon. And so I met with my superior, Father William J. Davis. He met with the staff of the headquarters. We consulted with the social ministry directors of all 10 provinces in the United States. They consulted with the 10 provincials, et cetera. And very importantly, the permission was given by the Jesuit order in the United States to undertake that process. And I reached out to the Vatican to get them to give us what information they had, to just have me get access to the archives, and they said no. I sent them a second letter saying, maybe you don't understand, who we are here, and that the President of the United States wants to get this information. We want to cooperate with him, and they said no again. So the bottom line is that this is a long and involved story that I don't have time for right now, but the bottom line is I ended up getting to get access to the classified portions of Project Blue Book, the top secret United States Air Force investigation that lied to everyone, saying that they'd investigated all these claims and there was really nothing to it, that they were all easily explained by some natural phenomenon that was being misperceived, etc. But they had a whole classified section of Blue Book, all of those verified, confirmed sightings of UFOs that they kept secret, and that there was an entire trove of information about that. And much to my surprise, and I might say to the surprise of the Congressional Research Service, I was given permission to get access to the classified portions and saw a UFO in the photographs that they had there. Unmistakable. Not just something vague in the sky, but a full-scale UFO that had crashed and plowed across this field that was covered in snow and embedded in the side of an embankment. And I was able to trace the symbols along the bottom of the dome of the saucer. So I brought this back to the Jesuit headquarters, and I communicated this to Father Davis. At which point, interestingly, Father Davis reached down and opened a drawer in his desk and took out an envelope and handed it to me. And I opened it up and pulled out an 8.5 by 11 black and white glossy photograph of a UFO. And I said, where did you get that? And he said, my sister Dodie gave it to me. Her husband, Michael, was the air traffic controller at the airport at Seattle, Washington. One of his best friends is a commercial pilot who took this photograph directly out of the window of his plane. And he didn't dare report it because of this protocol that's in place by the CIA and the intelligence community and the Defense Department, prohibiting people basically from ever reporting these things, or else you'll have to get sent to a psychiatrist or get your head examined. And so that he didn't want to get in trouble, so the pilot took it and brought it to his best friend, Mike, who was the air traffic controller, and gave it to him. It was interesting because when his friend brought the photograph to Michael, who was the head of the air traffic controllers, Michael himself didn't want to get in trouble. And so what he did is he said, look, I'm not going to report this either. So he took it and brought it home to his wife, Dodie, who was Father Davis's sister. And he said, here, give this to your brother. He's a priest. Okay. So this is sort of the first incarnation that I'm here today as the legal counsel for that group, who it might be appropriate to give this information to because they're priests, right? And so that people recognize immediately that this has profound implications. The existence of UFOs, the existence of a potential extraterrestrial civilization, that this has profound theological implications. So the bottom line is, this was the first professional encounter that I had. Oh, they're going to turn it back on. This was the first encounter that I had with this subject in a professional capacity back in 1977.
That's rude.
And then the second incarnation that I've had, so the second incarnation was in 1994. I was contacted by Dr. John Mack, the head of the Department of Clinical Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, to whom a number of the high-ranking military officials who insisted upon pressing forward on this issue and filing official reports about UFO encounters were sent to actually have their head examined, as part of this protocol to denigrate them, deter them from making filings like this, and they would get sent to get a psychiatric examination. And Dr. John Mack had interviewed
And then they found out that I had a genius IQ.
officials, and then began to develop a practice of finding other people that were highly credible. This was the second time in my professional career that I'd had a direct encounter with all of this information, and I got to know John very well. I was his attorney. I represented him in front of the Harvard Faculty Committee for some 18 months when Harvard University was trying to support. Know John very well. I was his attorney. I represented him in front of the Harvard Faculty Committee for some